The first time the wolf appeared, it was just a shadow moving through the trees. No one noticed at first, just a flicker of movement at the edge of town, where the dense forest met the open land. But as the days passed, more people saw it. A lone wolf, larger than most, with thick silver-gray fur and piercing golden eyes, standing at the outskirts of the small mountain town. At first, the townspeople assumed it was passing through. Wild animals often wandered close but never stayed long. But this one was different. It didn't leave. The wolf never attacked, never howled, never showed aggression. It just watched. From the edge of farms, from the tops of hills, from behind clusters of trees. Always distant, always silent, and always staring. The town grows uneasy. People became uneasy. A predator so close to their homes should have been a threat, yet it didn't behave like one. Hunters tried to chase it off by firing warning shots into the air, but the wolf barely flinched. Rangers left raw meat at the forest's edge, hoping to lure it away, but it ignored every offering. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't hunting. It was waiting. For what? No one could understand. Rumors spread through town like wildfire. Some believed the wolf was sick. Others said it was a bad omen. A few whispered that it wasn't a normal wolf at all, but something else, something watching them for reasons beyond their understanding. The townspeople couldn't agree on what to do. Some wanted it driven away. Others insisted it should be left alone. The only thing they all shared was the same unsettling question. Why was it here? A test of trust. One night, an experienced animal rescuer named Daniel ventured closer than anyone had before. He had worked with wolves before, rehabilitating injured ones and helping them return to the wild. If anyone could understand this animal's behavior, it was him. With slow, careful steps, Daniel approached, a piece of fresh meat in his gloved hand. The wolf turned its golden eyes toward him, but didn't move. Daniel knelt, extending the food. The wolf stared at him for a long moment. Then, without so much as a sniff, it turned and walked away. The rejection sent chills down Daniel's spine. Wolves didn't refuse food, especially in winter. This one had no interest in survival, at least not in the way other animals did. The mystery deepened, and as the days passed, the town waited for answers. But no one expected that the one who would solve the mystery wouldn't be a ranger, a hunter, or an expert. It would be a little girl. As the days stretched into weeks, the presence of the wolf became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a passing visitor. It was here to stay. At first, people tried to go about their lives as usual. Farmers tended to their animals, shopkeepers opened their stores, and children played in the streets. But no matter what they did, the wolf was always there, watching. The sightings became more frequent. Sometimes, the wolf stood motionless on a hill, its silhouette outlined against the sky. Other times, it lingered at the edge of farms, its golden eyes gleaming in the fading light. It never approached. It never made a sound. It simply existed, a silent observer that no one could understand. Fear spreads through the town. Not everyone was patient. Some were terrified. Parents started keeping their children indoors. Farmers checked their livestock constantly, fearing the wolf would attack their sheep or cattle. Hunters sharpened their rifles, muttering about how wild predators had no place so close to town. "It's only a matter of time before it turns on us," one man grumbled at the local diner. "It's hungry, and we're the closest thing to food." But others disagreed. "It's had plenty of chances to attack, and it never has," argued Sarah, the owner of the general store. "Wolves hunt. They don't just sit and stare." "That's what worries me," another man muttered. "What kind of wolf doesn't act like a wolf?" The debate continued, but no one had a real answer. Attempts to drive it away. Eventually, the town decided they couldn't wait any longer. The sheriff, an old but respected man named Bill, called for action. If the wolf wasn't leaving on its own, they would have to make it leave. A small group of men, armed with rifles and torches, set out one evening. Their plan was simple: scare the wolf enough that it would run deep into the forest and never return. They found it sitting near an abandoned barn, its silver-gray fur blending into the shadows. One of the men fired a shot into the air. The echo rang out through the quiet night. The wolf didn't flinch. They shouted, waved their torches, made as much noise as they could. The wolf just stared. For a long moment, neither side moved. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, the wolf turned and disappeared into the trees. The men returned, triumphant. They had done their job. The wolf was gone. But by morning, it was back, sitting in the same place, watching. A town divided. That was the moment fear turned into something deeper, unease. It wasn't just that the wolf refused to leave. It was that it had made a choice. It wasn't here by accident. It wasn't lost. It was waiting. But for what? No one knew. And that was the part that scared them the most. The tension in town had reached its peak. People whispered behind closed doors, debating what should be done. Some wanted the wolf captured, others wanted it gone for good, but no one could understand why it stayed. One afternoon, as the townspeople gathered near the old barn, where the wolf often lingered, a soft voice broke the murmurs. "I want to see the wolf." Gasps filled the air as heads turned toward the source. It was Lily, a 5-year-old girl with bright blue eyes and golden curls. She stood beside her mother, gripping the hem of her coat, staring toward the silent figure of the wolf in the distance. Her mother's face paled. "Lily, no, it's not safe." "But he's not bad," Lily insisted, her tiny voice filled with certainty. "He's just lonely." The crowd erupted in hushed protests. Parents pulled their children closer, warning them to stay back. Some people laughed nervously, dismissing her words as a child's imagination. But others shifted uneasily. What if she was right? A moment of defiance. Before anyone could stop her, Lily stepped forward. The air grew thick with tension. Her mother called her name, her voice sharp with fear. The sheriff took a step forward as if ready to grab her. But Lily kept walking, her small boots crunching in the frost-covered grass. The wolf watched her, its golden eyes locked onto hers. For a brief second, it seemed like time stood still. The town held its breath. Then something incredible happened. The wolf, which had ignored every hunter, every ranger, every shouting man with a gun, lowered its head. Not in fear, not in submission. In recognition. The wolf's reaction. The murmurs behind Lily turned into shocked silence. The wolf, who had rejected every attempt to be approached, was allowing a child near. Lily took another step, then another. The wolf did not move away. It did not growl. It did not bare its teeth. It simply watched her with something almost familiar in its gaze. Slowly, Lily extended her tiny hand. The crowd braced for the worst. Some turned away, afraid to watch. But the wolf did not snap at her. It did not run. It let her touch it. Her small fingers brushed against the thick fur on its snout, and for the first time since it had appeared, the wolf closed its eyes. Not in anger, not in pain, but in comfort. A town stunned. The silence was deafening. The girl, the wolf, the impossible connection between them. It didn't make sense. Then, barely above a whisper, Lily said a single word. A name. Shadow. The wolf's ears twitched. Its golden eyes opened, locking onto hers. A low, soft whimper escaped its throat. Lily's mother clutched her chest. The sheriff's mouth fell open. A farmer swore under his breath. Because that name wasn't random. It was the name of a dog the town had lost years ago. A dog that should not have survived. And yet, here it was. A ripple of shock swept through the crowd. People exchanged wide-eyed glances, their breath caught in their throats. Had they heard correctly? Had Lily really just called the wolf by a name that no one had spoken in years? Shadow. The wolf didn't react with confusion. It didn't flinch. It didn't turn away. Instead, it let out a low, soft whimper. Lily smiled. The sound was almost too quiet to hear, but for those close enough, it sent chills down their spines. It was not a growl, not a warning, just a sound of recognition, a sound of remembering. The weight of the name. Lily knelt in front of the wolf completely unafraid. She ran her small fingers through its thick fur, as if she had done it 100 times before. The crowd remained frozen, no one daring to interrupt. Her mother, pale with shock, took a hesitant step forward. "Lily, sweetheart, what did you call him?" Lily looked over her shoulder, confused by the question. "Shadow," she said simply. "That's his name." The word sent a shiver through the onlookers, because years ago there had been a dog named Shadow, a large, powerful dog, almost more wolf than canine. He had belonged to Lily's family, and he had been loved by the entire town, until he disappeared. A memory returns. It had been during a terrible storm, one of the worst in years. Trees had fallen, roads had flooded, and in the chaos, Shadow had gone missing. The town had searched for weeks, but he was never found. Some believed he had been taken by wild animals. Others thought he had run too far into the mountains and never made it back. But Lily's family had never forgotten him. Now, standing before them, was a wolf that looked eerily familiar, the same intelligent golden eyes, the same thick fur with streaks of silver, the same powerful stance. Could it be possible? Could Shadow have survived all this time, learning to live as a wild animal? Doubt and disbelief. "It's just a coincidence," someone whispered. "That's a wild wolf, not some lost pet." "It can't be Shadow," another voice added, though there was hesitation in his tone. "No dog survives that long in the wild, do they?" But the way the wolf stood before Lily, the way it didn't pull away from her touch, the way it had reacted to the name, it was too much to ignore. The idea seemed impossible. And yet, deep down, they all knew. This was no ordinary wolf. A wolf that didn't belong to the wild. Daniel, the wildlife rescuer who had tried to get close before, stepped forward cautiously. He had seen hundreds of wolves in his career. None had ever acted like this. "Wolves don't behave this way," he murmured. "They don't ignore food. They don't sit and watch a town. They don't let humans, especially a child, get this close. This wolf, he doesn't belong out here." The realization settled over the group like a heavy fog. Lily was still stroking the wolf's fur, humming softly. The creature, wild, untamed, feared by so many, stood perfectly still, letting her. For the first time, the town wasn't looking at a dangerous predator. They were looking at something else entirely. Something unbelievable. The town stood frozen, watching the impossible unfold. A wild wolf, one that had rejected every human who tried to approach, stood still under the gentle touch of a little girl. And not just any girl. Lily. Her small hands combed through its thick fur, her fingers tracing along old scars, hidden beneath the silver-gray coat. The wolf did not pull away. It did not snarl. It simply let her. Lily looked up, her bright blue eyes filled with certainty. "I told you," she said softly. "It's Shadow." A heavy silence followed. Could it really be true? Doubt and hope collide. Lily's mother, Emily, clutched her husband's arm, her face pale. "It can't be," she whispered, but her voice wavered. The sheriff, Bill, frowned deeply. "That's not a dog, Emily. That's a wolf." But Daniel, the wildlife rescuer, took a slow step closer. His eyes studied the wolf carefully, taking in every detail. The stance, the muscle structure, the way it looked at the little girl. He had worked with animals all his life, and everything in his gut told him the same thing. This wasn't a normal wolf. "I don't know how," he murmured, "but I think she might be right." The murmurs grew louder. Some people still doubted. Others, deep down, were starting to believe. The eyes that remember. Lily knelt in front of the wolf, placing both hands on either side of its face. The golden eyes that had once seemed so distant, so wild, softened as they met hers. "You remember me, don't you?" Lily whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wolf did something no one expected. It whined. The soft, heart-wrenching sound sent a shiver through the crowd. Wolves did not whine at humans. They growled. They howled. But this sound, it was the sound of longing, of recognition, of a heart that had never truly forgotten. The past comes rushing back. Emily's hands flew to her mouth. She remembered the way Shadow had whined as a puppy whenever he wanted to be held. She remembered the way he had rested his head against her when he was scared. This was him. Her husband's voice was barely above a whisper. How could he have survived? Daniel was the first to answer. Dogs and wolves share instincts. If Shadow got lost in the wild, he would have had to adapt. He would have had to learn how to hunt, how to protect himself, how to survive. He exhaled slowly, and it looks like he did. A wolf raised by humans, a dog forced to become something else, a creature caught between two worlds. A wolf's choice. Lily smiled and pressed her forehead against the wolf's. "I missed you," she whispered. The wolf, Shadow, closed his eyes. A flicker of something long lost stirred inside him. A feeling of warmth, of home. But was it too late? Had he been wild for too long? Could he ever truly come back? The town watched, waiting for the answer. But the choice would be Shadow's alone. The air felt thick with silence, the entire town holding its breath. A wild wolf, one that had been feared, chased, and misunderstood, stood still beneath the touch of a little girl. And in that moment, no one saw a beast. They saw Shadow, the dog they had once known, the loyal protector who had vanished in the storm all those years ago. But was he still the same? The wolf that no longer belonged? Lily hugged him tightly, her tiny arms barely reaching around his thick neck. The wolf didn't pull away. He didn't growl. He didn't tense. But he also didn't move. The townspeople were no longer sure what they were looking at. Shadow had survived in the wild, learned to be a wolf, learned to live without humans. Could he really return? Daniel stepped forward, his voice gentle. If he's been in the wild for this long, his instincts have changed. Even if he remembers you, that doesn't mean he can live like a pet again. Lily looked up, confusion on her face. But he's not a pet, she said simply. He's family. The words hit harder than anyone expected. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Because deep down, they all knew dogs weren't just animals. The bond between humans and their dogs ran deeper than instinct, deeper than survival. Shadow hadn't stayed near town because he was lost. He had stayed because, even after all these years, a part of him still remembered where he belonged. A town divided. The sheriff sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Look, I don't know if this is the same Shadow or just some wolf that got too close for too long. But either way, we can't have a wild animal wandering around town. It's not safe. The murmurs started again, some agreeing, some hesitating. He could still be dangerous, one man whispered. But he hasn't hurt anyone, another argued. Emily's voice was quiet but firm. He's not dangerous. The sheriff frowned. You don't know that. I do. The certainty in her voice made everyone pause. She turned toward Shadow, her eyes soft but determined. Because if he was truly wild, if he had forgotten us completely, he wouldn't still be here. And no one could argue with that. A choice to be made. Shadow stepped back, breaking Lily's embrace. He turned his head, looking at the trees, the vast wilderness beyond. Then he looked at the people, the town that had once been his home. His body tensed for a moment. Then he did something no one expected. He took a step forward, not toward the woods, toward Lily, toward home. Lily's face lit up, but Daniel held up a hand. Wait. His voice was calm, measured. If he's going to come back, it has to be his choice. We can't force him. Emily knelt beside her daughter. Lily, sweetheart, call him. Lily reached out her hand, her voice soft but filled with hope. "Come on, Shadow." For a moment, everything was still. And then, the wolf that had once been a dog, the creature caught between two worlds, made his choice. He stepped forward. A collective gasp swept through the crowd as Shadow took another step forward. His golden eyes flickered with something deep, something torn between instinct and memory. He had survived in the wild, learned its rules, its dangers, its freedom. But now, standing before the little girl who had once been his family, he was faced with a choice that no instinct could answer. Lily kept her hand out, her tiny fingers open in quiet invitation. "Come on, Shadow," she whispered again. Her voice held no command, no expectation, only warmth. And that was what made the difference. The wolf that remembered. Shadow hesitated, his body still tense, as if his instincts were at war with his heart. Then, slowly, carefully, he pressed his nose against her palm. Lily beamed. A soft murmur swept through the crowd, disbelief and awe mixing together. Some had feared him. Some had doubted, but there was no denying it now. He knew her. Shadow let out a deep breath, his body relaxing for the first time since he had appeared. It was as if something heavy had lifted from him, something that had kept him wandering, watching from the distance. And now, at last, he had found what he had been searching for. The town's uncertainty. Despite the incredible moment, not everyone was convinced. The sheriff shifted uneasily. This doesn't change the fact that he's been in the wild for years. He might still be dangerous. Daniel, the wildlife expert, studied Shadow closely. It's true that wolves don't just forget how to survive. He's different now, but he hasn't attacked anyone. He hasn't hunted livestock. He's been here, watching, waiting. And now we know why. A deep silence followed. He was waiting for his family. Emily's eyes welled with tears as she knelt beside Lily. She slowly reached out, placing a cautious hand on Shadow's thick fur. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, he let out a slow, quiet breath, one of recognition, of trust. It was the final confirmation they needed. This was Shadow, the last barrier. But just because Shadow remembered them didn't mean the journey was over. He had spent years in the wild. Could he really live among humans again? Daniel glanced at the sheriff. If they're willing to take him in, he deserves a chance. The sheriff sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. He had spent weeks worrying about the wolf, fearing what it might do. And now he was faced with something he had never expected. A wolf that wasn't a wolf. A dog that had become something more. After a long moment, he nodded. "All right," he said gruffly. "But on one condition." Everyone turned to him. "If he's staying, we have to be sure he's safe. No risks. No guessing." Daniel nodded. "That's fair." Emily looked down at Shadow, her hand still resting gently against his fur. "We'll do whatever it takes." Lily giggled, wrapping her arms around Shadow's thick neck. "You're coming home." Shadow didn't move. But this time, he didn't need to. Because deep down, he already knew. He had finally found his way back. The town watched in silence as Shadow remained still in Lily's embrace. The wolf, once feared, once thought to be lost to the wild forever, had made his choice. He had come home. But the journey wasn't over yet. Earning trust again. Daniel, the wildlife expert, knelt beside Emily and Lily, watching Shadow closely. Reintroducing him to a home won't be simple, he warned. His instincts have changed. He spent years fending for himself. Emily nodded. "We understand." Lily, however, simply smiled. "He'll remember," she said with the unwavering faith only a child could have. The sheriff cleared his throat. "We'll keep an eye on things, if he shows signs of aggression." "He won't," Lily interrupted. A chuckle rippled through the crowd, easing the last remnants of tension. No one had expected this ending. No one had imagined that the wild beast stalking their town was really a long-lost friend. Returning home. That evening, Shadow followed Lily and her family home. He didn't need to be pulled or coaxed. He walked beside them, his large paws making no sound against the dirt road. It felt familiar, yet strange, like stepping back into a dream. The old house was still the same. The wooden porch, the scent of pine in the air, the wind chimes that used to sing during warm summer nights. Shadow hesitated at the doorway. For a moment, everyone feared he wouldn't cross the threshold, that too much time had passed, that he no longer belonged. But then Lily reached out, her fingers brushing against his thick fur. "It's okay," she whispered. Shadow took a deep breath. Then, with slow, steady steps, he walked inside. The adjustment period. The first few weeks were not easy. Shadow was no longer just a pet. He was something in between, a wolf with a dog's memories. At night, he paced near the back door, staring at the tree line as if listening for something unseen. His body remained tense when he slept, ears twitching at the slightest sound. But he never left. Every morning, Lily would wake up and find him curled near her bed, watching over her like he had when she was a toddler. Slowly, the walls he had built around himself started to crack. He accepted food from their hands. He allowed Emily to brush out the tangles in his fur. He even rested his head in Lily's lap during quiet afternoons on the porch. Piece by piece, he was remembering. Piece by piece, he was coming back. A town changed. At first, people were hesitant. Some still feared he would turn, that his time in the wild had changed him too much. But as weeks turned into months, those fears faded. Shadow never harmed anyone. He never showed aggression. If anything, he was more protective than before, standing guard when Lily played outside, keeping a watchful eye over the town, as if he had taken on the role of its silent guardian. The whispers of fear became stories of wonder. A wolf that had found his way home. A creature that had lived between two worlds and chosen love over instinct. The final proof. One crisp autumn evening, as the family sat outside, Lily rested her head against Shadow's thick fur. The wind rustled the trees, and in the distance, the faint howl of wild wolves echoed through the night. Shadow's ears perked up. He lifted his head, his golden eyes fixed on the darkened forest. For a moment, Emily feared he would leave, that some part of the wild still called to him. But then, Shadow did something that removed all doubt. He turned his head, pressing his nose gently against Lily's cheek. Then he lay back down, his large body curling protectively around her. The call of the wild had no power over him anymore, because he had already found his pack, and he was never leaving again.